this is my review of Onward. Okay, so the premise of Onward is actually a little interesting. I like Pixar films in general. They're some of my favorite films. But Onward's premise is a little bit interesting in that it's a fantasy setting, but it's set in the modern day. So those two clashes kind of make it a little bit interesting because they take two ideas that shouldn't blend together and actually blend them together. Also, it kind of took me a bit to watch this film because we're currently quarantined, and Onward kind of got the short end of the stick because it came out just as the quarantine was happening. So me and my family had to rent it, watch it then, and then we watched it, and we all enjoyed it, sort of. My dad maybe, but we all enjoyed it. It's a fun time, and I do recommend. And before I start this review, I do recommend watching it with your family because it's a really good family movie. But the story is actually kind of interesting. So stop me if you think you've heard of this before. Long ago, the world was full of magic and wonder, and fantasy creatures, heroes, wizards, and all other assortments of people would battle and show off their magical skills. And magic was everything. It was the epicenter of all society at the time, and was one of the greatest achievements. However, it came with one very significant drawback, in that it was incredibly difficult to use, and not everybody had the gift to use it. And as a result, when technology eventually came along and showed that there was an easier way than mastering magic to get by, it eventually caused modern society to develop without magic, and in time, magic pretty much all but disappeared. Very little of it actually remains, and very few people actually remember it existed in the first place. So, yeah, that's the premise of Onward, rediscovering what magic is. And sure enough, we're introduced to two brothers, Ian Lightfoot and his brother Barley, played by Tom Holland and Chris Pratt, respectively. So I should establish this. They live alone with their mother Laurel, and their father Will kind of passed away a long time ago. He got sick while Laurel was pregnant with Ian, and Barley only has a few memories of him because he was such a little kid at the time. But Will passed away, and it has taken a bit of a toll on their family. So Ian, having never met his dad, clings to anything he can desperately to try and figure out what his father was like. And when he finally gets a lead from one of his old classmates, he tries to channel his dad to become more confident, and it backfires horribly that day. And sure enough, it's also his birthday. And it's just 16 years of him not remembering his dad, and on his birthday he decides, hey, you know what? It's a new me. It's gonna be a new me. I'm going to be more confident, like my dad was apparently. So I'm going to try and channel my dad to become more confident. And as I said, it backfires horribly because Ian is a very awkward little elf. He's not exactly the most charismatic or the most charming. He's kind of a nerd, I'll be honest. And his brother isn't much better. So Barley is a bit of a magic and history nut, and sure enough, because both of them kind of coincide with one another, he often winds up defending old properties from back in the day that were very important. Basically his reasoning is that they're destroying town history, and he's not okay with it. And sure enough, he gets in trouble with it. As we see him defending an old fountain near the school where Ian attends, and he's immediately caught and arrested and escorted off the premises. And it's something that his father figure-ish guy called Bronco, who is the chief of police, constantly reminds him. He hangs out around their house. He's been dating their mother for a while, and they're kind of antagonistic toward him because he's new dad, and they're still hung up over old dad. So naturally, the two kind of clash a lot. And also it should be noted that Barley has a fantasy tabletop RPG game that he plays, which according to him is 100% historically accurate, which makes sense because they do live in a fantasy setting. But in any case, Barley loves history and magic, and the fact that the two kind of coincide with one another means that he's very in love with magic and loves things like that. So not everybody supports his ideas because they believe he's a bit of a screw up, and it becomes an important plot point later. So remember it. But Barley and Ian have been living without their father. One's a socially awkward nerd who's trying to figure out what his father was like. The other is a bit of a history/magic nut who wants to find magic and is very over the top in his whole I like magic thing. But he is kind of an interesting character because he's kind of the big brother type that you would kind of like being seen with. Because he's so eccentric that people kind of just don't like him very much. But in any case, it's Ian's 16th birthday. He's trying to channel his father, and when that fails, he returns home a little bit sad-hearted. And Laurel notices this and reveals that their dad actually left them a gift that he said they should only receive once they turn 16. And sure enough, she goes into the attic, she pulls out this big wrapped thing, and it turns out to be a wizard staff. It turns out that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, and that like his son Barley, Will also believed in magic and wanted to try and do whatever he could to see what kind of people his two sons grew up to be. And sure enough, he provided them with a special spell that he created himself called the Visitation Spell, which winds up being the entire plot point of the movie. So the Visitation Spell, as it's normally supposed to work, is that you're supposed to use the wizard staff and recite a certain incantation, and it'll bring somebody back for a full 24 hours. Keyword, that's how it's supposed to work. Barley immediately upon seeing the spell, and immediately upon seeing that he got his hands on Will got his hands on a Phoenix gem, tries to use the spell to actually bring him back, and fails miserably. After several minutes of trying, he gives up and just places the staff on Ian's desk and leaves. However, Ian, who was just kind of screwing around and trying to figure out what exactly it is the spell is supposed to do, accidentally sets it off, and Barley walks in at that exact moment after hearing the commotion, and realizing that the spell is actually working and his brother has the gift, tries to help him resurrect Dad, and it only half works. Literally, it brings back his legs, the bottom half of his torso, and nothing else. It's just legs and a butt. That's it. That's all their dad wound up being. They botched the spell, and now they don't have another opportunity to do it. But upon realizing that they need to go on a quest, and that his brother has the gift, Barley suggests that they go on a quest to find another Phoenix gem, knowing that they have a full 24 hours to pull it off, until that actually happens. At Barley's request, the two actually go on a bit of a journey. They bring along their half dad and get into Barley's van Guinevere, which winds up being their mode of transportation for most of the story. And they go to set off on a quest, pointing with their first lead being the Manticore's Tavern, which they got from Barley's tabletop game. As I explained, it's apparently factually accurate. And sure enough, he does wind up being right-ish, but so he leaves a note for Laurel, letting them know where they're going, and Laurel immediately gets very concerned, as mothers are when kids run away, and tries to find them. At which point the movie breaks into an A plot and a B plot, with the A plot focusing on the boys and trying to resurrect their dad, and the B plot focusing on Laurel trying to find her kids. So on their way to the Manticore's Tavern, the two boys actually strike up a bit of a conversation. They state that what they're going to do once Dad gets resurrected, and Barley doesn't have a very long list, but Ian has been waiting for this his whole life and has an entire list that he wants to go over. So there's a lot of things Ian wants to do with his dad. He wants to have a driving lesson, which he hasn't successfully done, as the first couple minutes of the movie establish. He wants to play catch. He wants to have a heart-to-heart. He wants to basically do everything that he should be doing with his father, but couldn't. So he has a whole list of things like that. He wants to share his life story with his father, things like that. But eventually they arrive at the Manticore's Tavern, which Ian doesn't even believes shouldn't have been real, but is, and it is real, but not in the way the boys were expecting. So they get in, and it's a very family-friendly establishment. I'll put it that way. It's very family-friendly. But sure enough, the Manticore's Tavern is real, and it is still being run by the Manticore, a Manticore named Corey, who has since stopped sending people on dangerous quests and is actually just trying to live an honest to good life, because she's had a couple of people get into horrible accidents on her quests, and she doesn't want to deal with that anymore, which I guess makes sense. But after Ian finally steps up after getting tired of being dismissed and being pushed around, finally reminds Corey of who she used to be and how she shouldn't just let herself go into complacency, because she used to be a warrior, she used to be a real tough guy, and now she's just kind of a daisy, basically. She's just this kind of character who went from being this badass warrior who could beat a guy in one punch to this waitress in a restaurant that she owns. So, kind of a stark contrast. And Corey, upon realizing that she kind of has become the very thing she hopes to never become, goes into a bit of a fit and just accidentally burns down the tavern in the process, but not before scaring off the patrons, claiming that it's under renovations. So Ian and Barley attempt to steal a map, but it burns up in the fire. And the closest thing they have are the little kids' placemats that she owns, which are, according to Corey, based on the actual map. So they take it, specifically one that another little girl had completed, and sure enough, it has an actual clue they can use, Raven's Point, which is an actual place that they know of, and they decide to take the freeway, despite Barley's suggestion that they should take something called the Path of Peril, which is winds up being the actual correct way. But they start going on the freeway and eventually run out of gas. And despite some shenanigans to try and enlarge the gas can, which in theory should enlarge the gas inside the can, it doesn't work, with Ian getting a splinter and our old pal Barley wind up being a midget for most of it. He winds up shrinking down to a really tiny size and having a high-pitched voice. So, just imagine Chris Pratt inhaling helium. That's basically what Barley becomes. And so they go to the gas station to get gas because they ran out of gas in Guinevere, and now they have to go get new gas and sure enough head to the gas station. While they're doing that, Laurel eventually winds up at the Manticore's Tavern and sees it's on fire and immediately becomes concerned for her kids. And sure enough, she finally meets up with Corey, who explains to her what happened and how she had sent her kids on a quest, but also realizes that she failed to mention that there was actually a guardian curse that's guarding the Phoenix Gem, and the second they take it, it's going to set off and destroy wherever it is they are. So they got to be very careful now. And also they need to go get they need to get to the boys before the curse is accidentally released. But in any case, Laurel's able to sneak Corey out of there, and they get into Laurel's car and head off to go find out where her boys are. And she even enlists Colt to help her out. But in any case, now that that's out of the way, the boys have finally arrived at a gas station. They start filling it up. They even pay for some Cheetos, and in the process, because he doesn't have a top head, and because Barley's a little bit of a historical nut, Will, or at least his legs, and Barley accidentally offend a group of pixie biker gangs, which is one of the funniest things in this whole movie because it's such a stark contrast to what you would expect a pixie to be. But they upset a pixie biker gang called the Pixie Dusters, who proceed to chase after them all the way to their car, and Ian attempts to get Barley to drive, but after realizing Barley is still shrunk and unable to, gets in the driver's seat himself and merges onto the freeway, something he struggled with a bit during his driving test. And a high-speed chase ensues, and they eventually shake off the Pixie Dusters, who in the process learn how to fly because they had forgotten how. But in any case, they do manage to escape the Pixie Dusters, but now they got a new problem. It turns out their high-speed chase attracted the attention of the police, and to make matters worse, Will's body just kind of wanders out the back door of the van. So he's arrested for a DUI when he's not actually drunk. He just can't see because he, again, doesn't have a top half of his body. He's just legs. That's it. And eventually the boys get an idea to use a transformation spell to make themselves look like Colt Bronco. And the way the spell works is that it only enables you to look like that person you want to look like, provided you're always telling the truth while you're using it. So it's a very tricky spell to use, but one that they managed to pull off with some hiccups at the beginning. They managed to pull it off, convince the police that it's actually Ian who's stumbling around drunk, and when he's not actually drunk, and it's actually Will. But they managed to convince the police to let Ian go. But then one of the police members throws a bit of a curveball their way by having a conversation about Barley and how much of a screw up he is. And while Ian denies that his brother's a screw up as Colt Bronco, but he realizes the spell actually gives him away, and Barley realizes in the process that his brother actually does think he's a screw up, and that he's not taking his suggestions because he doesn't think that he has good ideas. So yeah, Ian and Barley have a falling out after leaving and successfully turning back, which alerts the police once they realize that Colt Bronco's footprints just kind of changed from centaur prints to elf prints, which alerts the police, and he's immediately given a call, and since he's already looking for people, he figures he might as well look for himself, basically. But yeah, Ian and Barley have a bit of a falling out with Ian trying to deny the fact that he actually said what he said and that the spell got it wrong and that he didn't in fact lie. But Barley sees right through it, pointing out that he did in fact lie because the spell couldn't have been faulty. The fact of the matter is, Ian does think his brother is a screw up and is avoiding going through the path of peril because he realizes that because he believes that his brother has bad ideas. So Ian and Barley have a bit of an argument over whether or not they should take the path of peril, and in the process, Will actually breaks the tension by dancing very goofily using only his bottom legs, which breaks up the mood pretty accurately as Will can in fact not dance. So it breaks up the tension between the two, and they decide, you know what? Let's go through the path of pain. What's the worst thing that could happen? And sure enough, they go through, but due to the bumpy road, Guinevere's bumper falls off due to it being a ramshackle thing that Barley just kind of slapped together. I kid you not, he slapped his van together himself. And that's a recurring plot point of the movie. But in any case, at this point, Colt Bronco, having found out that he himself had been in a place that he shouldn't have been in, actually calls up Laurel and asks her what happened. And sure enough, Laurel points out exactly what happened, and is even a little proud of Ian, because through Corey and now Colt Bronco, she finds out that not only has her weedy, nerdy son actually stepped up and become a lot more confident, but actually accomplished driving, which he's been terrified of. So yeah, that's the point. That's the whole point of quests. They're supposed to, the people on them are supposed to grow and become as people. And so far, Ian is doing that. He's growing as a person. He's learning. Yeah, hey, I can drive now, and also I'm learning magic, and also I'm becoming more confident. A lot of things I needed to work on. So Ian is slowly becoming more confident. But in any case, as Colt is looking for the sons and eventually finds them, seeing the bumper that fell off Guinevere and going after it, he decides to call Laurel back, at which point Laurel strikes up a conversation with Corey about what the curse actually is. And sure enough, the curse is actually this thing that, as I said, is a guardian curse that will protect them, that is supposed to protect the Phoenix Gem, and it's unknown what it actually is, but it's supposed to take the form of this giant dragon thing, which it does later. But she does proclaim that the only thing that can destroy the curse is her magic sword, which she sold because she was having trouble making ends meet, so she sold it to a pawn shop, but she knows exactly where it is, because she knows that the sword will probably never get sold because it's a sword. So, swords are cool, but this is in a world where swords have become obsolete. There's no way anybody is ever going to buy a sword. So they go to the pawn shop to actually buy it back. Meanwhile, Ian and Barley have gone through a giant beanstalk forest and have arrived at a drawbridge. But the only way across the drawbridge is to kind of use a spell that's kind of like a trust exercise. If you believe, the way the spell works is that if you believe there is a foothold underneath you, you will be able to walk across. You need to be convinced with every step that you're stepping onto something rather than stepping onto nothing. And sure enough, Ian doesn't trust the spell, but Barley ties a rope around his waist. But halfway through, the rope kind of falls off, and Ian doesn't even realize it until he's one step away from getting to the other side of the ravine, where the other side of the drawbridge is, where he can actually lower it for the rest of the group. And sure enough, he slips and falls, but he catches himself and is able to pull himself back up, and then blows the drawbridge. And while Ian gives Barley a bit of a mouthful and gives him a bit of a hard time about how he needed the rope, Barley points out, did he really? And sure enough, Ian just realizes that he did in fact make it to the other side almost the whole way without the rope. So he realizes that he kind of didn't need the rope, and he realizes, hey, I did that by myself. That's pretty impressive. But it's at this point where Colt Bronco actually catches up with him, and Colt tells him that they need to get in the car and head home. But Ian decides not to listen and instead drives off. And unfortunately for them, Colt actually brought the entire police squadron with him, and Ian heads off in the direction of some bird statues, which it should be noted are the actual Raven's point. So yeah, Barley figured that out, and Ian realized that they were going the wrong way, which is when they decide to actually go off and try and find them. However, they wind up in a dead end, and Ian tries to use Wizard's Lightning to actually destroy some rocks and make a barricade for them so they can get away. When Barley sees that Ian isn't confident enough to actually use it and isn't able to use it yet, he sacrifices Guinevere to destroy the rocks and cause them to tumble down, which is very heartbreaking because Barley loved that truck. He loved it to death. He basically made it himself. It was his pride and joy. It was his baby, and then he had to destroy it to save himself and Ian and what's left of his dad. So So with that, they actually head off to follow the statues, because now the police aren't actually able to follow them, and they start looking for bits and pieces of stone, for bits and pieces of Raven statue, which are all pointing in one direction, and eventually arriving at a Raven statue that's pointing straight down. And while Barley is initially like, okay, let's just lift the giant dais that the thing is pointing at, Ian eventually realizes the true solution to the puzzle, which is that there's actually a mirror, and it's pointing toward the thing in its chest, which is actually a little piece of stone shaped like a clover, which points them in the direction of a giant water tunnel thing, which they're supposed to float down. And they initially don't get it. Their idea is that, how do we do this? And then they eventually realize, wait, duh, we have Cheetos. We can use an enlargement spell to enlarge the Cheetos, and they use the Cheeto as a boat. So, yeah, that's one of the funniest things ever. They use a Cheeto as a boat and just kind of use it to sail across the river. Meanwhile, Laurel and Corey have arrived at the pawn shop. They grab the sword. They grab the sword from the pawn shop owner, try to get it for some money. But when the pawn shop owner realizes it's a one-of-a-kind sword, she raises the price from $10 to $10,000. And naturally, this pisses Corey off, and she stings Corey with her tail, and Corey stings her with her tail, which causes the pawn shop owner to collapse on the floor, paralyzed. And they just kind of steal the sword and stash it in the back of the car. But then the pixie dusters come along, having since learned to fly, and accidentally cause Corey and Laurel to derail, and they have to figure out another way to transport. And eventually, Laurel realizes, wait, Corey has wings. She's kind of been neglecting them lately. How about we use those to get where we need to go? And it works. So meanwhile, Ian and Barley have long since been traveling in the water for a couple of hours now, and they're close to getting to time on resurrecting their dad fully. So they're trying to figure out, what do we do to pass the time? At which point they start playing catch. They start joking around. They start doing all of that good stuff. But during the process, Barley actually lets it slip why he doesn't like being afraid. So it's been established up to this point. Barley is not afraid of anything. He's kind of a shoot first, ask questions later kind of guy. He's very open and doesn't fear anything. But then he reveals in this scene the reason why. So, as we established, their dad was very sick when he passed away. But how sick is the reason Barley decided to never be afraid again. So, Barley didn't get to say goodbye to his dad. He saw his dad hooked up to all the machines. He saw that his dad didn't quite look like himself, and he was scared. He was scared of what his dad had become. He was scared of how bad shape his dad was. And he was so scared that he just ran out of the room and never said goodbye to his dad, which is why he vowed to never be scared again. I mean, it's a very heart-touching story. Because he lost his dad and wasn't able to say goodbye because he was too scared to, and that's a little heartbreaking, really. But in any case, after hearing this, Ian comforts him, and then they arrive at a giant temple, which has a lot of traps, a gelatinous blob monster, which Barley has been teasing for most of the movie at this point, and then it actually winds up happening. It was brought up as a joke, and then it actually happens. So, yeah, it is funny, mainly because you weren't expecting it to happen, but then it actually happens. Because, as I said, the game is 100% factually accurate. But they do avoid the traps and also the giant creature using giant shields to shield themselves from all the arrow traps that are flying around, because they don't have time to actually solve the puzzle, and because there's a giant blob monster right behind them. And Ian and Barley, with Will's legs in tow, that actually managed to make it through the door that's closing behind them, and they wind up in another chamber. And while it's initially believed that they're not supposed to step on the button that's in the middle of the chamber starts to flood with water, and they realize, wait, I think the button they realize that there's a symbol on the ceiling and a symbol on the button, and they realize, oh, we were supposed to push that. But because they can't hold their breath for that long, they eventually realize, hey, Will doesn't need to breathe. He's just legs. Why don't we get Dad to do it? And sure enough, Dad does it, and they escape through the hole. And they climb up the ladder at the top of the hole, out into the sunset of whatever awaits them, and they wind up in front of Ian's high school. Yeah, it took them 24 hours for them to go in a complete circle. They went in a complete 180 degrees. They went a complete 360 degrees from where they started. They started at the high school. They went through this long quest that took them 22 hours to complete, and they wound up just going back to where they started. So, yeah, Ian is naturally very upset because he feels like they wasted their time, and Barley is very upset because he believes that he may have gotten it wrong. And so the two part ways after Ian decides to spend what's little time is left with his dad, and goes off to go sulk with his dad and spend what little time he has left. But in the process, he starts crossing off things on his left, but eventually realizes throughout the journey he did everything on the list, and eventually realizes, hey, my dad wasn't there for me, but Barley always was there for me. And realizes that Barley was basically a father figure for him the whole time, and goes back to reconcile with Barley. Barley, meanwhile, is desperately trying to find out a clue, and eventually realizes the fountain he was defending all the way back at the beginning of the film is actually the solution to the quest. And despite the construction crew trying to stop him from actually climbing on top of the statue, and stop it climbing on top of the fountain, eventually succeeds in finding the opening where the little clover piece fits in, and sure enough opens up the little contraption on the fountain that hides the Phoenix gem, which is what they've been searching for the whole movie. And the two brothers reunite at that exact moment, but then Ian notices that Barley unwittingly unleashed the curse, and sure enough, the curse flies up into the air. It's a giant massive ball with gas floating around it, and it uses this gas to create itself a body. It starts grabbing pieces of the school, which all just happen to be nearby, and it assembles itself into a giant dragon, complete with the mascot of the school for a face, which is funny at first, but it's still terrifying because it's a giant dragon. I mean, it's just one of the funniest juxtapositions ever. It's just this giant, massive, monstrous dragon made out of concrete and steel, and it has a cartoonish dragon for a face. It's funny, but in any case, the dragon has been unleashed, and the curse is looking for the Phoenix gem, which just happens to be in the possession of Barley and Ian, who are trying to resurrect their dad. They aren't able to hold off the dragon and complete the resurrection spell by themselves. But fortunately, they don't have to. At this point, Laurel and Corey show up and hold off the dragon by first destroying its wings, and then Laurel, using some of her techniques that she learned way back at the beginning of the movie, and for some reason she just suddenly is skilled at, suddenly climbs on top of the dragon and just spears the dragon through its core. Not enough to kill it, but enough to paralyze it long enough for them to actually successfully start the ritual that will revive their dad. So the ritual is now underway, and Barley volunteers to go fight and protect his brother and his father. But Ian disagrees, pointing out that he never had a dad, but he always had Barley, and he doesn't want to lose Barley. So he goes in himself, and using all of the magic he's learned, manages to fend off the dragon and slay it as their dad is being resurrected. So he succeeds in destroying the dragon, and the concrete collapses around him, and he's only just able to see his dad. But he sees that Barley and his dad finally are able to say goodbye to one another, and then his dad fades away. He never gets to meet his dad, but he kind of already did. He knew what kind of person. He realizes now that he wasn't looking for a dad. He just didn't realize that he already kind of had one. He already had a father figure to look up to, so he didn't really need to meet his dad. At which point, Barley rescues him from the pile of concrete and tells him, "Hey, Dad said he loves you, and also that his wizard name would be Wildred the Whimsical." because it's a joke. So it's a joke. So he points out that his dad loves him and then gives him a hug from his dad. So it's a very sappy ending, and then just kind of everything just kind of goes back to normal, but with a little bit of a difference. So now everybody has changed a lot because of what happens during the story. Colt realizes that he's now should be embracing his centaur roots and running to work. And sure enough, he does exactly that with his wind flowing through his hair. Ian has become a lot more confident and now has actual friends. He's actually managed to make a couple of friends due to the fact that he kind of saved and also maybe destroyed the school. And he's made a couple of friends. Barley is now being respected by his brother now that Ian has realized that he kind of took care of him his whole life, and realizes that yes, Barley was the father figure I never knew I had. So now he respects his brother. And also Ian is now using magic constantly. He's able to successfully use magic. He's able to use it and show off the wonders that were lost to time, and he's able to show everybody that yes, magic is still out there. You just have to look for it. And yeah, it's a great little movie. I didn't do it nearly enough justice because I'm pretty sure I missed a couple of steps here or there. But it is a great movie. I do recommend watching it. It is a great movie to watch with your family. It's a great fantasy movie that isn't actually a fantasy movie, but it is a great movie nonetheless. And it is one of my favorite Pixar films, and not the favorite. Up is my favorite, but it is definitely up there as one of my favorite Pixar films. So I definitely recommend watching it with your family, mainly because we're all stuck inside, and I think that would be a good idea. But it's a great film. I recommend it. I think it's cute and adorable. The themes of it are very good. It's what Pixar does best, which is family relatableness and fantasy wonder, and the two just blend perfectly together. And especially in the modern setting, which you wouldn't think would work, but it does. It is a very good movie. I do recommend watching it. I do recommend watching it and maybe adding it to your collection of Pixar films. It's up there. It's a great movie. It's a great movie, and I recommend watching it. But in any case, that's my review of Onward. What did you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below. Also, be sure to follow me on Facebook and on Twitter in the description below, and be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you want to help support the show and see more film reviews like this, then be sure to check out my Patreon. It's only a couple bucks a month. It really helps me out, and you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks that are my way saying thanks. So be sure to check those out in the description below as well. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace!